on new devices.
Or old devices.
I am Bob from RetroRGB. I love messing with these things, drinking beer, and long walks on the beach. Wes?
I'm Wes DeSantis. I run the podcast, SecondOpinionGames.com. We talk on retro and new stuff on the podcast, and good friend of Bob's, and I just like helping him out with this sort of stuff. So here we are. This is most of my junk. Some of it is Bob's, and it is a rabbit hole of a hobby. It's one of those things that you just keep going into it deeper and deeper and deeper until you just realize, oh my god, how much money have I spent on it? But boy, oh boy, do things look great.
Exactly. So I guess a basic breakdown of what you need to start with is your source signal has to always look good. I did a couple talks on this. I have videos up on the website, but the short version is all analog consoles, when they generate the video, so just think of it like the video card from a computer, is generated in RGB. So the three colors are separated, and then the sync signal where if you unplug it, well, this is sync. Now we back to that again.
Yeah.
Bam, that's what happens without sync.
Yeah.
So that is what you need to start with to get the best signal, because while technically you could just stick a composite video cable into one of these or buy a cheap scaler, it's going to look awful, and there's things like lag, which we'll get into. But basically when you go with the original consoles, you just have to get the best output possible from them, and then either find old, expensive ways to play them or new ways through devices. Or, of course, just buy new consoles that are designed to do both.
Yes. So quick overview of just some of the items we have here. First, this is a Sony BVM monitor, and we'll get into this in a moment. I'll show some of the NES games that look really good on this. This is your generic 1080p Samsung monitor that I had floating around in my house. And this here, what would you say, Bob? This is, what did you do to this one? Are you and your friend Jose?
So that is a good quality consumer grade RGB mounted TV. So that is actually, a TV that you could find for free or for a few dollars. That if you know what you're doing, you could actually mod it and get RGB input directly into it. And it looks pretty darn good, even compared to a high-end BVM. Here you go. Ooh. So things like this are pretty complicated, and it's the only mod that I wouldn't recommend people try on their own without expertise, because if you don't discharge the tube, you could literally die.
Yeah.
There were people who are telling me stories about old arcade technicians who literally pooped themselves because they accidentally didn't discharge it hard or good enough, and when they grab onto it, the shock is that bad that their whole body tenses, and people have gone to the hospital. And I don't know of anybody that's died, but I'm positive it could happen. So be very careful if you do something like this. But as you can see, if you know what you're doing, just wow, what an awesome solution. Because these things go for at least $500 nowadays, and this is, even if you have to pay for it, $50. So.
Yeah, and so quick thing. If you're interested in getting into this, something a PVM or a BVM. Problem with eBay is you can't ship these things. It's going to cost you more or as much as the actual monitor.
Or they show up broken.
And then what do you do? Craigslist is, you'll be surprised, there are so many studios or medical facilities that use these that just, they're getting rid of stuff. They're like, oh, we need to clean out the storeroom. And then they'll literally just be like, here's 20 of them. Please, Bob had one of those moments about 6 months ago, and it was just like, I'm up to my ears in BVMs, and it's, that does happen on times. I've just realized something, if you don't mind driving a little bit, is that app Let Go. If you type in like Sony PVM, BVM, there's a lot of places up in the Boston area that's selling them. And these people are usually old studios that are just trying to get rid of them. And I was thinking, oh yeah, there's a lot of TV stuff up in Boston still, and sports and whatnot. And it's like, all right, so I've seen a lot of these, this level quality go for like $300 to $500, maybe even cheaper. You just got to drive up there and get it. So that's one of the apps I've used to find where this stuff is.
Yeah, and just any tips when you go to buy one of these, just fire it up and look at it. A few people actually bring a SNES Mini and the 240p test suite so they could test with color bars and stuff.
Which we'll show in a little bit. Yeah.
But basically, the reason these things are the most sought after is because while CRTs don't have pixels, if you just think of it in the terms of pixels, they have more vertical lines inside. So like if you were to look really close at Link's shield, you could actually see more definition than on a slightly lower line consumer grade TV. And that's because the BBMs were used for things like calibrating movies and color correcting and all those, like Jurassic Park was calibrated on one of these. Yeah, or the medical ones for looking at MRIs. So that's why it's kind of I would call it a new way to play it now, because most of us wouldn't have been able to afford $20,000 back in the day for one of these. So now a couple hundred, although expensive, is much less expensive. Button, sorry.
Yeah.
And then of course RGB modding old TVs. While people have done it for a while, it's more, I would call it new that it's in the mainstream. So you wouldn't have really heard of this 5 years ago, only if you were one of the nerds that really dug deep into it. But I'm trying to get guides together. One of the only guides I'll ever do that's totally safety oriented, but I'd like to see more of these because there's so many TVs that I've found that are just mint and barely used that don't get used anymore. So
what did you do exactly?
So when you do an on-screen menu, so you press the menu button, it's nice and clear as opposed to everything else. That's because that menu is driven with RGB. So you basically take the RGB inputs of the menu, rip them up and put them onto a switch, and then on that switch you have the original menu signals and then the console signals for the input. So you actually have to switch between the two, but that way you're driving RGB directly to the tube and bypassing pretty much everything else.
Question.
Yeah, can you just go back a step? Like, how do you get an RGB signal out of original consoles or hardware?
So that is a different thing because I'd have to talk about that for an hour. But it's all on my site. There's other videos and stuff. Some just require a cable, some require a mod. But if you're a crazy perfectionist like me, you would pretty much count on modding everything, even if it's just a little cheap thing.
Unless it's like a Sega Jaguar or a Atari Jaguar.
There's probably a mod for that too.
I'm sure there's probably a mod for that too, but it's
yeah. So for example, like the Super Nintendo Mini, the original one, you can get a board for like $20 and wire it pretty easily, and it looks phenomenal.
This is what this is driving right now.
Yeah.
So, and the idea too is, you want to get to that point where these guys that worked at Nintendo were seeing. This is like what the developers saw. It's pretty neat because I don't have the Genesis here. You can literally, has anyone here played Sonic Mania? Right? If you play Sonic Mania, the waterfall in Sonic Mania doesn't look like the waterfall in the original Sonic. It looks like the RGB waterfall. Because the guy who made it, Christian Whitehead, is such a nut job and perfectionist. If you play the game here, you play Sonic here, the waterfall looks like just these lines because Sega knew that the TV's resolution is so low, it'd balloon out and it'd look like water moving. It was pretty cool.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You have a great picture of that on your site where you show
next to each other. Yeah, exactly. So there is an argument to be made that I've heard a lot of people say, well, you should play it on composite and you should play it on an old TV because that's how you remember it. But I don't. It's my personal opinion. No, absolutely not. And I imagine if you guys are here, you probably won't either.
Yeah.
So.
Maybe S-Video if you're lucky.
Maybe. But.
Yes.
Sorry, so RGB is like the video only. So in terms of the audio, like for that monitor on the left, what's the difference between that versus like a CRT computer monitor?
So the audio that pulled it out of the consoles, as long as you have a good shielded cable, and all the links to all the better ones are on the site, you could either have it broken out of the connector itself and go into a stereo. For the audio is actually wired directly to the audio in input 1, so on this TV you actually have to have it set to input 1.
Yeah.
But you can break it out in different ways, and many consoles actually have digital audio mods. So you could actually do, I don't know if I did this.
This one has this Super Nintendo actually has a fiber optic out.
So you could plug it right into a surround sound stereo and have crystal clear output.
So to answer your question a little bit further too, every console has its own quirks, idiosyncrasies of getting RGB out, or just the best. I think a great example is the world that you have in, let's say, getting RGB out of a Sega Genesis is 110% different than getting it out of a N64.
Right.
And and that's why Bob literally killed himself for years to make a site. That's literally a compendium of every system. I think one of the easiest systems is the PlayStation 2. Where
you just plug it in.
You plug it in, you get the RGB cable, you plug it in, you go in the menu, hit RGB mode, and you're good to go, and you're also playing PS1 games on it too, in
What about
RGB.
component?
What?
What about component?
Component also.
Yeah, you could do both. There's
but-
actually a new mod for the PS2 as well.
Yes,
so
exactly. There's
everywhere you go, there's depending how far you want to get into it, and
This is new mod for the PS2.
you have to take it apart and remove a couple of resistors, but it disables S-Video, but it allows RGBS to go through a Sync-on Luma cable on all resolutions. So right now, if you want to get the best 480p, you have to put it through sync converters, sync
Yeah.
strippers. There's a whole line of junk that you have to put in. And now after you do this mod, you literally just plug the cable in and you're done.
So, actually, here, let's turn on the analog really quick, just because one cool thing about getting one of the high-end monitors, I'll shut this off, is the high contrast and just the vividness of the colors. And one thing I always like to show off is in Legend of Zelda, the sword shot. Let me use my words, and how like bright it is. I'm gonna register my name. Right?
Your save battery's dead in that thing?
Yes, this is the cartridge I bring to things because if anything happened to it, I don't give a damn. So let me get the sword. Yeah. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this.
And don't trust me, like.
So if you want to look here, you can see how vivid the sword shot looks. It's like super duper bright, and like if you play this in a dark room, the sword shot almost is too bright. You're just like but you can see it's that super high contrast on this screen and the vividness, and it's so cool because you can just see the scan lines on everything. I think this TV's a little too vivid. Yeah, I gotta turn that down. But Bob basically gave me this bit of advice. He's like a Sony BVM versus a Sony PVM. The PVM is a Corvette. It's a nice fast car. Doesn't need a lot of TLC. Like if you keep it nice, this is like a Ferrari. It's a lot faster, but it's very finicky. So you just kind of gotta constantly futz around with it. I don't know. My stomach was probably bumping into the dials or something when we were moving it.
Anytime you have any really high-end piece of equipment, it's going to actually require more care than just a general workhorse. So if you buy a PVM, that thing, you do a capacitor replacement, you calibrate it, it'll last forever, especially for our use because they were designed to be on 24/7. So having it just on to play games will last forever. But a BVM, it's easier to work on because you could remove the cards, but you want to calibrate it. If you have the bigger ones, you want to calibrate it with the tube facing east, or else you'll actually get weird color distortion if you rotate it. That's when you get to that high end of a level, you start to notice something.
Facing east?
Yes. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have believed it myself if my friend who came over calibrated it. I have it on my 32-inch on a rolling rack. If you have it all calibrated, he goes, all right, watch the right corner. And he rotates it, and a little purple dot comes up, and he rotates it back, and it's gone. It was crazy. So,
Yeah, there's actually a way to test how strong that is using AM radio. It's true though, because if you ever.
So wait, an AM radio will mess with one of these things.
Oh yeah, if you get it close enough. But also the AM radios work on attenuation. So if you ever see someone trying to your grandpa trying to listen to AM radio, and they're playing with the antenna, say no, the antenna's that's for FM. It's like a little coil inside, and it's pointing it east usually makes it work better. But yeah, it's crazy because I used to fix up a lot of arcade machines that move across country, and just moving across country, it would literally go through different bands of the magnetic field or the B fields that the Earth gives out, and I'd have to degauss the screens because people think the screen is broken. I'm like, no. This actually had a broken degausser, but I can do that. And now, if this went on a train and went across and ended up in California and they turned it on, there's all gobbledygook to just hit that and good to go. Stuff that you don't have to worry about anymore. New technology.
but as much as I love these, and as much as these are absolutely by far my favorite way to play older consoles, because it really just, You know, to me, like Link doesn't look right unless you see both the vertical and horizontal scan lines running through them. But most people don't want to deal with that, or don't have the space for it, can't lift it, break their back if they lift too many of them.
Yeah.
So the other things are upscalers. Where's the other thing? Oh.
Right there.
Yeah, right in front of me.
I got it.
Thanks, Wes.
So this here is the Framemeister, also known as like the current king of the crop. But there's a contender. Let's see if this thing will. Oh, I have to turn.
No,
it
it's
on.
there. You got it.
This isn't on the.
So fire the sword again.
Yes. Oh, wrong controller. I have to use a Nintendo controller.
So there's definitely a difference.
Yeah, if you guys see, you can literally see how much slower it is with the lag.
Yep.
And when we get the 240 test fit, you're definitely going to see a difference.
Yeah. So this is the perfect example of why, one of the many reasons why I love old tubes. So if you get any one of these, even if you just get a regular CRT and just plug in S-Video or Composite, you're done. There's nothing else to worry about. But as soon as you enter flat screens, the first thing you have to worry about is how much lag is on the monitor itself, and can that be helped at all? I've had some junk TVs over the years that have 5 frames of lag, even in game mode. And then what scaler you use also adds lag. So the Framemeister is just under 2 frames,
Yeah.
which isn't terrible, but then you add that to whatever your monitor is, that's, you know, it's bearable. The open source scan converter is 0.
About the Framemeister.
Yes.
All right, I've seen consoles that will scrunch a Neo Geo image horizontally. Do you think the Framemeister could, like, fix double rows of pixels?
In settings,
As
you can
terrible as that
probably
is.
mess with it.
I don't know if Firebrand X probably has a
He'll probably
profile
mess with that
for
too.
it.
But other stuff like the open source scan converter has 0 lag. And then I forgot to bring mine, but there's those awful scalers. They're just called SCART to HDMI.
Oh, Retro Game Arts downstairs had one of those $50 ones.
Yeah,
They didn't say it was the best. They said it was just an entry level, saying it's
Right.
for people who
Yeah.
are just getting into it.
I would agree with that. I also think it's great for streamers who do PS1 and 2 games that always switch between 480i and 240p, because it processes all images, all old retro images, as 480i, so it's that weird interlaced look. But that's good if you're streaming, because then your capture card doesn't change between the resolutions. It always stays there. So that's a good little tool to have, but I wouldn't actually consider it a tool for gaming. So
What's that?
MSSC.
No, that red card.
This here is the 240p test suite. So I'll just show the lag test. So
yeah, so if anybody actually has a phone with the slow-mo feature in it, you could run that, and you could actually take a slow-mo video and see the difference between the two. And by the way, that's actually how I do all of my lag testing, is pretty much the same scenario. The console into the G-SCART switch, which has dual outputs, into an OSSC, and then that's how you could test which monitors have how much lag to them.
So this is called the manual lag test. And what you do is you try to line up when the star is in with the center star. And you look at your screen and it'll tell you how many lags a frame you miss. So it's basically the RGB equivalent of, what's that game? The Wild West game?
Oh,
Quick Draw or something?
Something like that.
Like Hogan's Alley or something. So
I think it's Hogan's Alley.
I'm going to use this one. I'm just going to look here and watch how many frames I'm going to be off by.
Oh yeah, it's one. Good.
4 frames, 3 frames. Oh, that was good. 2 frames, 9 frames. So, like, that would be miserable in Mega Man, in the Gutsman zone. You know what I mean? When they're trying to jump on that. And you wonder, like, man, I really suck at this. I used to be good at it. It might be the lag of the TV because they really designed those games to be pixel perfect jumps. I'm going to now look at this screen. Oh, it gave me my score.
Yeah.
I'll do it again. So, 2 frames. Oh, there we go. Let me look at this one. 0, -2, -1. So I'm doing a lot better this time around. -2, -2, 0, -1, 2, 1. So before I was like an average of 6 frames off, and now I'm pretty much like 1, 0, or 2. So that's a good one. And then where's what's the test for the background zone
Test patterns? I think it's the top one, test patterns.
No, we got the one where it shows the sonic level.
I think it's the test patterns. I think he's right.
The test patterns. This one?
Yep, and then.
Oh, there.
Can you buy that test cartridge anywhere, or do you have to make them?
You can get the ROM for free if you have a ROM cart, but you could actually buy the cartridge from different places. The only thing I don't know is where to get a NES one, but you can get Super Nintendo and Genesis. I think Renee from DB Electronics sells the Genesis one. There was a few people selling the Super Nintendo one, and I really hope somebody starts selling the Nintendo one.
Yes. Yeah, because this one I got from, I don't know. No, I made this one. I'm sorry. I made this one. The shell I got from somewhere, but.
Maybe it's not in this menu.
Is it the one where it's someone's
Kinda
face
see.
and it's something you recommend me getting? The OSSC or the Framemeister?
That's a really tough one, and I don't quite know of a way to test compatibility yet. Nick from HD Retrovision was actually trying to make something that you put into a Raspberry Pi and you plug that into your TV and you could test resolutions.
Yeah.
So I would wait a little while longer until we have a way to test it. But
Yes.
Do they both resample the image and display it as finer pixels, basically in signal form?
yeah. So
What?
what the difference between this? That's actually a good question. The difference between this and the scaler built into your TV is that the scalers built into all flat screens are designed to make movies and TV look really good.
They're terrible. I mean, they're terrible for games.
Yeah, but the side effect of that is
Yeah.
it does not look good for games, whereas something like the open source scan converter essentially just multiplies each pixel by how many times, which is why it looks sharp and perfect. And if you did that with TV, it would look terrible. So
Yeah.
that's
Some
why.
of them have an extremely high latency unless they're on game mode.
Mm-hmm.
Flat screens.
And some doesn't even matter if you put it on game mode. It's still pretty.
Yeah.
Into that case too.
That's one thing I do also like about the Sony TVs, and again now the LG TVs because they're using the same company to do the operating system, is that even not in game mode, the latency is very low for a TV. This is not a Major League Gaming Counter-Strike monitor, but this is. The Sonys and the LGs are very good for input lag. Some of the Vizios have like freakishly good input lag for TV, but the game mode is very low contrast. So you are sacrificing some of that post-processing, and that it really depends. Like if you want the game to look good versus the input lag. And to be honest, most modern games do consider input lag. So, I'll platinum Bloodborne or Dark Souls with my TV, not in game mode. I'm able to handle that.
Yeah.
But I can't go back and I can't play like Mega Man on that because I'll just die every 2 seconds because I can't do the pixel perfect jumps.
I actually think the Mega Man Shovel Knight is probably the best way to differentiate because
Yeah.
Mega Man was designed with zero lag, zero controller lag, other than the microseconds it takes from the controller to get to there. But so those jumps, the falling platforms, I think in Mega Man 2, or maybe it was 3, those jumps are impossible if you have any lag at all.
Yeah.
But a game like Shovel Knight takes a flat screen lag into consideration. So it's still challenging, it's still a lot of fun, but the challenge isn't added because of lag. I mean, if you have a really laggy TV,
Yeah.
of course, but the designers kept that in mind. So that's definitely how the difference between newer game development and older.
One other thing too is there is kind of a renaissance now of the new old system. So great example is the Analogue Nt. And in the world of, I think the NES is the great litmus test. It's like the first one. All the patents of the NES ran out. So it's a field day where they can make their own NESs and all that stuff. So we literally you have your typical like Hyperkin stuff, the stuff you buy at Walmart, really cheaply. That's their market though. That's their market. People like us, we go with that and we're like, that's disgusting. It looks gross. But for some normal person who's like, I just want to play Tecmo Bowl, you know, that's totally fine for them.
What about the USB AVS?
I don't know what that
The
is.
retro USB.
Oh, the retro
AVS.
AVS. Oh, I have one of those. I should even know what that is.
That's kind of the next step up.
That's
because
step 2.
Once you get, it's kind of hard to do this without getting into the debate of what do you call it, but once you have FPGA emulation, that's the best way I could put that, is that's emulation where one chip actually mimics the functions of the other chip of the original consoles. So something like the Analogue Nt Mini or the AVS from RetroUSB are as close as you could get to the original, to the point where some of the original glitches in the game still work because it's that perfect to the original. And other consoles don't really get, like the cheap clone consoles, don't really go down the road of mimicking everything perfectly, and then the software emulation consoles, while accurate, could also add lag because software has to be processed through any kind of operating system, whereas the FPGA is zero lag other than whatever.
So a great example is the Retron 5 has a goofy, has a goofy amount of lag to the point where it's unplayable, and now the Retron 5 also comes with a lot of other issues where it basically destroys your cartridges because the pins are really poorly put into it and other shenanigans.
I never had those shenanigans, so I might be lucky.
But good. But one thing about these is, you know, there's a lot of companies working on Super Nintendo variants and Genesis variants of that field programmable gate array, the FPGA, which has a very fun history. I remember buying those for restoring classic cars back in the early 90s because they could basically put an entire wiring harness to, you know, a 1968 Chevelle on a chip this big, and you just connect like your headlights, your this, and everything just one little chip, and they've literally gotten so advanced with them. It's like, yes, we can literally make a hardware version of an NES on a chip this big, and so then you're going to have the Super Nintendo and probably Genesis, and then there'll be, I'm sure, some Omni system that'll have everything on it at some point in the near future.
And the Analogue Nt Mini is pretty much the perfect example of that because the designer, Kevin Horton, he did FPGA cores, they call them, for, 10 different consoles on there? And if you load up the software for it, it's very expensive. It's like $500 after shipping. But now you have Master System, Game Gear, Game Boy Color, Nintendo, ColecoVision, Atari, all pretty much perfect outputs, HDMI or RGB or composite and all the rest, all in one box. So kind of makes that $500 seem a little cheaper.
Let's say if you were just an NES guy, and that's all you wanted, NES and high def and RGB, you'd get this because then you don't need the Framemeister because this has the HDMI output. And the nice thing is this does the Game Boy, the Master System, and a bunch of other things. And then, of course, you have Famicom games with Famicom cartridge behind here input. But again, if you're not, then, you know, kind of a Wild West right now. I'm glad this exists because right now the official Nintendo emulation of the NES is garbage on their consoles. So like the Wii and the Wii U, I think I call it Gravy Vision. It just looks like, or like Vaseline. It's like they just put Vaseline over it. And I got really excited when they did the arcade classics for the Nintendo Switch. And I downloaded that, and it's the same damn emulator from the Wii U, and it just looks super fuzzy. So I'm literally looking at this little, 720p Switch screen, which is a great screen, and it looks gross. And I'm like, I know this emulated, so I went and got Mario Brothers on my Raspberry Pi just to look at it, and it looks 1,000 times better. I'm like, okay, come on, Nintendo, what the hell? Their Super Nintendo emulator is pretty.
Yeah, definitely. It looks better. The SNES Classic, the new Classic editions, the Nintendo Classic, Super Nintendo Classic. They're decent. They're decent ways to do it. And if you happen to like the games that are on it, I would call it a great choice. But I would like to play all of the games.
Yes.
That was my question. Like for something like the NES Classic, like does it have like input lag issues? Like I think Mega Man 2 is one of the games.
It has about 2 frames of lag, so it's totally tolerable.
By the way, that uses a better emulator than what's on the Wii U, so it looks better.
Yeah.
And the Switch.
Yes. And the Switch. Well, there's no NES games on the Switch, but I know
There
the
was
arcade
that
emulator.
game that was a tribute to Iwata.
He's got you there. The hidden golf game. Didn't we talk about it when you were on the
yes.
podcast with
Duh, the golf game, yes. Yeah, I don't know.
Would you like the link?
I gotta
Which console has the 2 frames of lag?
The classic consoles, so NES Classics, SNES Classic.
Yeah, and they're the same, hardware-wise. You open them up, it's the exact same board. They just
Yep.
put Super Nintendo games on it. It's like,
For the RetroRGB, do you notice any lag in that one just going through HDMI?
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it's. I don't know how many frames. How
It's
many?
different for each emulator.
Yeah.
And I, like, in a lot of the testing I do, I'll just run through the first level of Super Mario Brothers 1. We all know it. We all could, see that in our head. And I could kind of be, like, half talking to you guys, half doing it on any of these scenarios. And I can't do that on a Raspberry Pi because it just adds that much lag that I'll die right away.
Yeah.
It's still, I love it for arcade emulation though, because you just can't, no one can afford to have every arcade game in their house. Well, most people can't.
Yeah.
So.
Is there some kind of handheld version of a Raspberry Pi with almost no lag?
No, it's not going to happen.
No, because the Raspberry Pi is, you're not only contending with the lag of the screen, but you're running on two levels: is whatever the Raspberry Pi is using as its base and Unix operating system, and then the emulator. So, and that just adds whatever level depending on how the Raspberry Pi is handling it. If you have Raspberry Pi 2 versus Raspberry Pi 3 versus what the encoder is for it. So. Because I even think, aren't there's people making like RGB shields for a Raspberry Pi, right? Or at least
Yes, yeah. There's 3 different kits that I just haven't gotten around to the review yet. But
And
there's different options, lots of great things you could do.
Yeah, and that will reduce the lag
It will? What is that called?
because then you won't have the lag of the monitor. But then, I don't know what the name of the
It's
shields
just the
are.
analog outputs for them, so you can get an RGB one. You could use
display
composite
output
video for
for-
free. Yeah.
Oh,
And these will work on the HDMI output or not?
No, these are to get analog output. So with just the cable, you can get composite video, but with these boards, you get RGB, component, VGA, whatever you want, pretty much. And that actually would be a good way if you wanted to test out a VGA monitor. You can get one of those $20 adapters and emulate it and have a pretty decent look to it. So,
Maybe see the OSSC in action.
yeah.
Yeah, I think we need the power supply for it. While I set it up, why don't you hawk this TV?
Yeah, I guess we could talk about this stuff for hours and hours. That's why it was kind of hard to put together something to fit in, because I knew I definitely always like to do the Q&As, because more often than not, the questions are better than what I've come up to talk about. So I guess, let me just open up the floor to any questions while Wes gets the demo going.
I had a question actually about the SNES. So I've played original SNES on the flat screen, just through RGB, but nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
You get that green stripe down the center.
Yes.
The SDR takes care of that.
No, that so there's 2 ways to fix that. And the SNES is my favorite console, so I've put an unhealthily ridiculous amount of time into messing with them. And there's 2 ways to get rid of that. One is if you just use an RGB bypass amp, which can only be done on the 1 chips or the Mini, because how do I say this without taking 20 minutes? The way the power circuit on that video amp is built gets rid of all excess crap on the screen. But the actual fix for it is to desolder the power regulator, the 7805, and put a new one in and swap a capacitor. I just uploaded a video about how to do that. It's easier than it looks. I was kind of fumbling around in the video because I was trying to move the camera and solder around it, which is harder than it would seem. But that is the actual fix, is the power regulator. So.
And you're just upgrading it, or I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, basically that's exactly what you're doing. So you're just upgrading it with a more efficient one. So, sorry.
What's the best way of getting a Framemeister or an OSSC?
OSSC you can only get right now from videogameperfection.com.
Wheels are now available.
And you could, if you just buy it from their website, they're finally switched over to a pre-order list. So I think if anybody buys it now, you could actually get it by the end of the year. And I mean, if it keeps selling, they're going to keep stock of it. The Framemeister, I think you can get directly from Solaris in Japan. Yeah, and depending on the exchange rate, sometimes it's better to use eBay, sometimes it's not. But I would not pay whatever the MSRP is. I just wouldn't pay over that, because occasionally it'll run out of stock and you'll see them on eBay for like $800. So yeah, forget that.
I think they were supposedly going to stop making them this year. I don't know if that's still true.
They said they were stopping manufacturing them, but that doesn't take into account how much stock they have. They haven't announced a follow-up product, but I mean, I can't imagine that they won't at some point. But they certainly won't until they're almost out of the originals, otherwise no one would buy out the stock. So
I think they're like 350 to 400 or
Yeah, yeah, and the cost thing too is another factor for a lot of people because the OSSC now has audio built in, so you can get it delivered for like $230, and you need nothing else. You just plug everything into it. Component video or S video with there's a new board coming out that you could actually use S, and then of course RGB and VGA. So that's cheaper and it kind of handles everything, and the only thing you have to worry about is compatibility.
What version is that?
1.4.
Okay, because they said 1.6 has the HDMI, I believe.
It does.
Yeah. This is one of the
And the
first.
different audio input with it.
Yeah.
Is there a solution, a cheap like budget solution for multi-console, maybe handheld but attachable to a TV emulation, like HyperCam? How much lag does that have?
So every kind of software-based solution is going to have a minimum of 2 frames of lag, no matter what. And then, I mean, there's exceptions to the rule with arcade boards and stuff, but when you're talking about consoles, it's always going to be laggy no matter what solution.
Are there things like HyperCam consoles but handheld?
No,
There aren't?
no. You could make your own. You could make like a Raspberry Pi.
Like a Pi
The
Boy.
free play tech is basically looks like a Game Boy Advance, but has a Raspberry Pi in it, so you can do that.
There was also that Virtual Duo portable.
That's
like
not
with the
an emulation
NES.
system. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Switching generations, going to the Dreamcast, I know it can do 480p and 240p.
Mhm.
Is there a device that you can switch to? Say I have a PC monitor and a PVM, or would there be a device where you can switch to, okay, I want to do 480p, so I'm going to use my PC series. Okay, this doesn't support VGA.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to
The Toro,
PVM.
definitely. It's by the Behar brothers. It's a little box, and it has a VGA and a SCART output, and it's got a little switch inside, or maybe
It's
some
like-
have jumper, some have a switch.
The new ones have the new ones switches. It's like 2
Good.
switches, which is really nice.
But that's basically it. So you could, if you have your PVM, and you could have them both hooked up at the same time, actually. Obviously, if your PVM doesn't support 480p, then it would only work. But yeah, it's my favorite solution, and the guys that make it are really good guys that actually care about their customers. So I've seen them fix things out of warranty, well out of warranty, just because they felt bad. So it's a great product, good dudes. It's like the perfect thing to support.
Dreamcast is a great, because of the Toro, it's a great product to be like an intro into RGB.
Yeah.
It's literally you plug it in and it works. It's really nice. I like it a lot.
I might have already answered this, but so say you wanted your console to have RGB out, what is your recommendation for setup if you just have a basic flat screen TV, like 55-inch, okay, that's what's the best way of?
So for anybody starting out, my suggestion would actually be to get one of these, one way or another, whether it's going into your monitor or your flat screen, but just a female BNC connector or a female to Framemeister, whatever else, or if you have the OSSC, you don't need one of these. And I would just plug one console in at a time at first. A lot of people, it is a blast of nostalgia and it's neat, but it's not what they love. If you start playing these games and you love them, then I would worry about a switch. The G-SCART switch is what Wes has displayed there.
This is the G-SCART Lite.
That's the Lite.
This is the Lite.
Okay. So that's the one that's being sold now. It's got dual outputs. It can hold up to 8 consoles. And if you want to go absolutely crazy, you can get Extron crosspoints. The one I had was bigger than that monitor, and it had 32 inputs. But then you got to buy expensive BNC cables. But you could really scale your setup based on how much money you want to spend and how far you want to go into it. But yeah, I mean, my setup at home is basically a couple of consoles directly plugged into the OSSC. So I have the HD RetroVision cables through Component, my SNES through RGB, through the VGA port. I just made a custom cable, and then I have the SCART port open for when I just want to stick anything else in. So you could actually use that for all 3. Or use it as a switch because it's got 3 inputs.
Yeah. And this, by the way, the G-SCARTs, I have both. This is the Lite. It has 2 simultaneous SCART outputs. The other G-SCART switch has a SCART output and a RGB. It's the VGA port style, and you can have that go to BNC or SCART or whatever you want. And the best thing about this is it's auto switching. It just goes to whatever system's on. You know, it's kind of like the Ronco set it, then forget it kind of thing. But yeah, I'm, you know, any given time I have the Genesis, Super Nintendo, TurboGrafx 16, N64, and the Analogue Nt hooked up to it. So, you know, there's that's for me, and sometimes the Dreamcast for Power Stone.
It's funny, I could actually see that, visually see the less lag with the tree.
With the OSSC. So the OSSC is this, you know, it's big claim to fame right now. So Framemeister has more visual options, and you have a lot of these great profiles from Firebrand X, and the guy is just a freak of nature, which is how good he can make this stuff look.
Yeah.
But you have the extra frames of lag, you know, and this is, you know, if you're playing, you know, Earthbound, it doesn't matter. You know, you're playing a Final Fantasy, it doesn't matter. But the OSSC still looks great. Don't get me wrong. It just doesn't have as many options, doesn't have as many outputs. But the lag is like a freak of nature. I don't know how it's...
Zero lag.
Yeah.
It processes color a little different, so it is actually going to look better overall.
Yeah.
Can you make the TV 4x3?
On the OSSC, that's a pain in the butt. I can, it's just I'm going to leave it alone.
You'd have to use the setting in the TV.
Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes left. Is there anything anybody wants to see? Any
well,
other
you can get up
questions
and play
anybody
with
has?
this. That's why it's here, by the way. So be our guest, like,
Yeah,
you know.
let us know if you
Yeah,
want
if you
us
want
to do a
to.
demo or something.